Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for International Governance Innovation, or CIGI as we say. My name is Kevin Diaz and I work in public affairs here at CIGI. I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening's special presentation, which is taking place in conjunction with the Summer Lights Festival. Following tonight's lecture, we invite you to enjoy a performance by the Nota Bene Baroque Players Lumina projects. They're going to be in our foyer starting at 9 o'clock until midnight. This evening, we're very pleased to have with us Mr. Rick Haldenby, who will speak on the magic at the corners. That is, the architectural magic we see at this particular intersection in Uptown Waterloo. Rick, who was born in Toronto, is the son and grandson of architects and is a fellow of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. He is a graduate of the University of Waterloo School of Architecture, where he became a professor in 1976. In 1979, he founded the school's award-winning Rome program and served as the school's director from 1988 until 2013. Rick also spearheaded the project to relocate the School of Architecture to Cambridge in 2004. Rick is a specialist in Roman archaeology, architectural history, and in the design of cultural sites. He has chaired numerous significant architectural projects, committees, and juried competitions, and served as an architectural advisor to the City of Ottawa, the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, the University of Waterloo, and the CIGI campus here. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Mr. Rick Haldenby.
Thank you for coming tonight. It's a lovely Saturday night in late June, and I'm incredulous that so many people are here, and absolutely delighted to see you. When I was asked to contribute to Summer Lights, I did it primarily as a kind of lead up to and a promotion of the Building Waterloo Region project, of which I am the co-executive curator and curating 3 out of the 8 exhibits. So I'm here actually on completely false pretenses. I'm here to urge you to go to something else. And that something else, if you pick up the card on the way in or on the way out, is the opening festivities for Building Waterloo Region, which 2 weeks from last night will take place down at the School of Architecture. And if you like drinking and dancing, come down there and see the opening of the Ex Industria show. Then we're opening the Remade show at the Kitchener Studio, the old post office on Gaukel Street, in the afternoon on Saturday, and then the late afternoon on Saturday, we're launching No Small Plans, and that's a kind of segue into my talk tonight, because No Small Plans at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery, in effect, reintroduces the award-winning buildings that have been created in Waterloo Region over the last 30 years. It is, I think, an interesting coincidence that the first of those buildings to win a major national award was the Seagram Museum in 1986. And the most recent to win the same award, a Governor General's Medal, in 2014 is, of course, the building we're sitting in right now, which is now an adjunct to and a part of the CIGI campus with the former Seagram Museum. So we're sort of closing the circle here tonight. I am going to talk exclusively, because I'm talking about the corners. I'm going to talk about the buildings that are near us. I would just say, please pick up your invitation to the opening weekend of the launch weekend of Building Waterloo Region. Go to the website, check out all of the events that are there. There are 8 separate exhibitions, 2 of which are already open, one at the Region Museum and one at the Joseph Schneier House. 5 are going to open on the weekend of July 4th and 5th, and the last, the 8th, which is on the University of Waterloo campus, will open later in August to catch the students coming back with its own subversive brand of campus design. Well, since there's supposedly a campus there, but there's no design, so we've decided to create a design. So thanks for coming, and thanks for jumping the gun. Summer Lights is supposed to start at 9 o'clock, so Summer Lights at CIGI will start with the Nota Bene presentation. Music we had hoped in the courtyard, but the temperatures are a little bit unfriendly to traditional instruments. So the music will be in the lobby, but please enjoy the courtyard. If you've been watching the film, you know that the courtyard is actually a work of art. I mean, technically, it houses a work of landscape art, which maps out, in effect, a world of significant events in the history of governance. The fact of the matter is, I really want to be a comedian. I've always wanted to make people laugh, and it's taken me a long time to even begin to do that. I used to be way too serious. But on the other hand, I'm also someone who's been in one way or the other involved with all of the buildings that I'm going to show you. And some of the involvement some of it is governed by certain rules of confidentiality. Some of those rules I tend to think relax with time, and so I will probably reveal some truths and secrets that I shouldn't or wouldn't have before. But because some of my partners in crime on recent architect selection committees are in the room, I am chastened. I will respect the confidentiality up to a point. So, Summer Lights at CIGI, making magic the corners. Right. The magic we're talking about is the simple magic that comes from the fact that there is only one intersection in Canada that has 4 Governor General's award-winning buildings on it. Until just a few months ago, it was the only intersection in Canada that had 3 Governor General's award-winning buildings. Now we have a 4th. And we missed having a 5th by a hair. The jury did not select the addition, the second part of the Perimeter Institute for a Governor General's Medal. I am going to include it in the talk because it did win an Ontario Association of Architects Award of Excellence. So you've got 4 Governor General's Medal winning buildings and 1 OAA Award of Excellence building. And I should just point out that there is only 1 building in all of Canada that has ever won a Governor General's Medal, an American Institute of Architects Award of Design Excellence, and a Royal Institute of British Architects International Award, and that would be the building we're sitting in right now. Now, let me just also say one other thing by way of intro. And those of you who've heard me speak before have heard this, but it does seem to make an impression when I point out that in preparing for the Building Waterloo Region program of 8 exhibitions, we did a modest amount of research and came up with a simple truth, that there are more Governor General's award-winning buildings in Waterloo Region than in any other municipality in Canada, save, of course, for Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. So the big 3. We have more Governor General's award-winning buildings here. Actually, we have more Governor General's award-winning buildings at Erb and Caroline than they do in Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Quebec City, Hamilton, Halifax, all cities that are bigger than Waterloo Region. So I think that that's just an extraordinary fact. But there is no question that the concentration of those buildings is here. 4 out of the 7 are around us at Erb and Caroline. Well, this, of course, is Erb and Caroline, except I was not surprised to find in doing a little bit more research for tonight's talk that Caroline dead-ended at Erb until relatively recently. There was no cross street. There was a T intersection. You can see Caroline Street running up beside the newer barrel warehouses from Seagram's Distillery. Seagram's Distillery is across from us. This picture is taken while they are constructing that monument of modern urbanism known as Waterloo Square. Um, and you can also see what the characteristics of these sites were at the time. Number one, the railway line, because the area northwest of us here was predominantly industrial, the railway lines are much more prominent. They have a lot of spur lines, especially northwest of the point that Erb and Caroline met. And you can actually see the creek that runs directly under the Seagram Museum building, the older part of the Balsley School, and then right down and disappears under King Street. And so this is the kind of urban prehistory of the Erb and Caroline intersection. And there's my fact. Well, I mean, it all starts with a mill. That's almost everything in Waterloo region starts. Now, this mill was not, this mill, as far as I can tell, and Ken could correct me, is actually on the other side of Caroline Street. It's not on the Seagram site. But when you start to look at the maps here from the 19th century, you can see Caroline Street going up and teeing, dead-ending into Erb Street, what is now Erb Street. You can see the buildings primarily clustered around on King Street, and then a fairly scattered settlement in the rest of the town, and the public square at the bottom at King and William, which was a kind of ambitious piece of urban design that is still evident if you go and look at it. It's a little hard because of the expansion of King Street, and actually the topography drops across the site, which doesn't really make a good square. And here in the mid-century, just before, or almost at the moment that Seagram is establishing itself on this site, this is the condition. Again, very sparse settlement at the time, really only along King Street. But by the end of the Second World War, what we know as Uptown Waterloo was pretty consistently built up along King Street. Really a kind of continuous fabric of buildings. Many of the buildings on the west side were industrial and commercial buildings. Well, all of them were essentially industrial, not most of them were industrial commercial. More conventional street architecture on the east side with the typical long, narrow lots of southern Ontario towns, and then a kind of looser fabric of building, mainly industrial, on the west side. And you can see up at the top the entrance feature for Waterloo Park, the big circle, and then, of course, the lake, the lake that was created by damming the creek. Here we are, just a little bit later. The Seagrams site is almost completely built out. You can see they're starting to construct Caroline Street, or the extension of Bridgeport Road around, connecting up to Caroline Street. And Waterloo Park is in full existence, but you're still not connecting. There's still no through point at Erb and Caroline. Well, the full devastation of the modern world is evident in this slide. King Street has no buildings on it on the west side anymore. All it has are parking lots. Waterloo Square gets built, the great image of the suburban mall brought into the center of the city, and of necessity then surrounded by a sea of parking, just as if you were at Fairview or eventually Conestoga. But Seagrams is still in full flight. Erb and Caroline actually exists. You can see the cars lined up coming to the Erb and Caroline intersection. The Marsland Center has been built. And then there's a kind of the continued existence of a typical Ontario street fabric of buildings, these narrow, long lots on the east side of King Street, and some distinct buildings. The Hotel Waterloo and the bank are still in place. There is still a fragment of a street here. And again, this is actually before Caroline and Bridgeport have been connected. The tracks are going through. You can see what the Seagram site was like. There is still no real no definition to the site across the street, which actually predicts what's going to eventually happen, is that though we've spawned some Governor General's award-winning buildings on the north side of Erb Street and on the west side of the Caroline-Bridgeport connection, there isn't a kind of urban pattern to them. They're pretty much independent buildings. Again, these are the Kitchener record aerial photos from the 1950s and 1960s. They took them quite regularly through the period. You can see the Seagram site built out. The creek is still open, immediately under what eventually is the Seagram Museum, but it's been closed up pretty much it runs under the parking lot at Waterloo Square. So that was the condition of the Erb and Caroline intersection in the early 80s. And at that point, a decision was made by Seagrams to create a museum on the site of the beginning of the company. I don't know fully what the mechanisms were and what the negotiations were, but ultimately, an architect from Toronto named Barton Myers was hired. I know that one of the reasons Barton was hired was that Phyllis Lambert, who was a member of the Seagram family, was a great admirer of Barton Myers. This is where my story actually enters into this, because I didn't even see Waterloo until 1968. I grew up in downtown Toronto. I came out here in 1968 because my high school basketball team got into the provincial final. I wasn't on it. Me and basketball, no. But I came out here, and I never thought I'd ever see it again. But the following year, I was finishing my high school, and I applied. As was pointed out, my genes are architecture. I have architecture in my DNA. I didn't ever actually think I would do anything else but that. My father never had to put any pressure on me to be an architect because I never thought of doing anything else. So at the time, the University of Toronto was in the clutches of a rather demagogic leader named Peter Pregnell, and my father happened to be the chair of the licensing body, the registration board of the Ontario Association of Architects, which made him the enemy, and which made me the devil's spawn. So I went for an interview there. They were incredibly rude to me and treated me as if I were the devil's spawn, so I suddenly had to think of somewhere else to go to architecture school. And since I couldn't go to Carleton because I hadn't taken all the maths, guess what? I came to Waterloo. And other than that, there's no more to the story because I never left. But one interesting side note in this case is that I started architecture school at Waterloo in the fall of 1969, when the school was 2 years old and had just left the Faculty of Engineering and moved out into the least promising physical circumstances that any school of architecture I've ever known ever had to suffer through, and that was 411 Phillip Street. We went way up market to 419 Phillip Street after that. They were horrible places, but big and free. And it was in this period, in 1972, when I had the extraordinary privilege of having Barton Myers as my design professor. Barton came, and he was in charge of the 3A studio. That is the beginning of third year, and he took a group of us under his wing. And this is a man who had really revolutionized architecture in the Toronto area and Canada, to be frank. I mean, he and his partner, Jack Diamond, came up to Toronto when their first project was the York Square, the project on the northeast corner of Yorkville and Avenue Road, where they were the first ones not to tear down the existing buildings that were on the site, but to reuse them and to weave a fabric of new and old, creating a courtyard with actual trees and a cafe, and the bookseller was there. It was just the most humane solution to or antidote to the pervasive demolitions, abstraction, and inhumanity of much of what contemporary architecture in Toronto was doing. And of course, they moved on. Diamond and Myers did the famous University of Alberta hub residence, which tried to see a university residence not as a group of high-rise apartments, but as a street with apartments that looked into a covered street in Edmonton. It's a fascinating project, a fascinating approach to the campus. And that was the way these guys thought, completely out of the box. And putting aside the traditions of hardcore modernism and looking to weave together a series of threads that included an appreciation of architectural history, included a high level of value in existing buildings, and looked at the city not as simply a blank slate for real estate value enhancement, but as a cultural artifact and as a collection of buildings that also carry memory and carry the aspirations and experience of people who've lived there. So we just thought Barton was God. Barton built a little house for himself on Berryman Street in Toronto, which was like all the other Victorian houses, except that it had been built on a vacant lot, and it didn't look anything like a Victorian house, except that when you went into it, you realized he had sort of translated the traditional plan of a Victorian townhouse into a contemporary idiom, and with a hefty and rather, I think, inspired dose of pop art in the whole thing. The guy, he was an omnivore. He'd been a jet fighter pilot in the U.S. Marines. He couldn't have been any sexier if he was Sterling Moss, the guy was amazing. And then just as I was starting my career in teaching at Waterloo, Barton got the job of doing the Seagram Museum. Well, he always maintained that the most important thing in architecture was to have an idea, which doesn't seem like such a revelation, but it is, because if you came out of a kind of a theory of architecture which was highly deterministic, in which form was supposed to follow function and everything was supposed to be able to be reduced to a kind of mathematical equation or a statement of positivist logic, for Barton to come in and say, no, put that aside. What you need is an idea. You need an inspiration. You need a concept that's not determined by forces outside architecture, but which is determined by ideas that are part of architecture and come from inside. So when he got the Seagram Museum, his solution was pretty simple, and this is one of his very first sketches. And as you can see, the thing at the top, the shape at the top with the chamfered corner is the old barrel warehouse at the corner of Erb and Caroline. And his first idea was just to hollow out the center of it, because the entire warehouse was full of the giant wood racks on which they aged the whiskey barrels. And so he just saw that as a kind of big mass of material, almost a solid mass. And so his idea was quite simple. You hollow it out and make a kind of atrium space out of it, which is exactly what he did. And then you connect on almost a bridge into a second space, which he saw as a great industrial shed. I mean, it's just inspired by the big industrial buildings. It has virtually no features on the exterior, just big windows, sheer brick walls, and a roof that's coffered. It's made up of crossed members, and in the center of each of those coffers was a skylight that let light down into this big shed. And inside the sheds, there are smaller sheds, also inspired by the idiom of industrial architecture. So he actually creates a kind of irregular pattern of structures that are reminiscent of industrial buildings inside the big shed. And that's what he always called it when he talked about it. He called it the big shed. So, architectural ideas don't actually sound that complicated. In fact, I keep saying to students, architecture is best when it does things simply to start with, clearly, and has a definite notion of where it's going. You can make it more or less sophisticated and, frankly, more or less expensive as you go along. But have an idea first. So as you can see, I mean, here's the model, the presentation model that Barton Myers produced. You can see the old barrel warehouse, the famous barrel pyramid, recently demolished and distributed around. I missed the day. I wish I'd been here because it was part of the creation of the new CIGI building. They wanted to get rid of it, and apparently hundreds of people showed up to take barrels out of that pile, and I think that's fantastic. So Barton takes the old barrel warehouse, hollows out the middle, leaves the racks in place, and takes out weaves spaces in washrooms, meeting rooms, etc. It's extremely clever, and then connects over into this giant shed, a very, very simple building from the outside, where he creates a kind of cluster, a cluster of buildings within the buildings. And the image of the creek, it actually didn't end up being a fountain or a pool going right across the building, but it was there. Now, the other thing that weaves it together, he was not only my professor, but Barton Myers and his successor firm, Kubar, Payne, McKenna, Bloomberg, have been very, very consistent hirers of co-op students from the Waterloo architecture program. And they tend to want, as all architects do, they want the most talented ones. Surprise. Now, some architects have an easier time getting the most talented ones than others, but Barton Myers did pretty well. So during one of his last co-op terms, a young architect, now architect named John Schneier, whose name will turn up if you come to the second talk tonight. I should tell you that if you really like this talk, or hate it, and want to see if I can do better, I'm giving one at 11 o'clock at Kitchener City Hall, and there is zero overlap. That's all about Kitchener City Hall. I'm not even going to mention it again here. But John Schneer's name comes up in the Kitchener City Hall talk, too. Anyway, John Schneier was a co-op student working for Barton Myers who did a series of absolutely stupendous Prismacolor's colored pencil renderings of the interiors and exteriors of the Seagram Museum. So that's just another personal connection, which is astonishing. Now, parenthetically, I will say, and this will come out very clearly in the No Small Plans show across the way at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery, is that we're going to look at 8 award-winning buildings. The first group of them were done before the mid-90s, and the drawings and representations of those projects were all done by hand. And so you get these gorgeous Prismacolor drawings by John Schneier, you get fabulous colored ink on mylar renderings by Vic John Collins, you get Howard Sutcliffe's glorious watercolors, all of whom, just by the by, are Waterloo architecture students when they're doing them. Because in those days, as my colleague Dan Hoffman from Arizona State University said, Waterloo architects drew like angels. And they did. Today it's all done by computer, And I would have to be simply inhuman not to see some loss in that. But the students do fabulous work. There isn't that sense of the relationship between the head, the heart, the eye, and the hand that puts it on the page. Anyway, John's drawings are stupendous, wonderful things. And this is what it looked like until, of course, the building at the back mysteriously burned down. A courtyard, the courtyard was part of the original idea. That's why the barrels were in the middle, the whole reminiscence. And let me also say, Seagram continued to produce whiskey here until 1992. So for a decade after the museum opens in 1983, and Seagram's closes down the actual operation here in 1992. So they were still making booze here. It was a really remarkable place, and still is. I mean, I have to hand it. After it was the Seagram Museum, it became the headquarters of Waterloo Maple, a math software company, and then it became the Center for International Governance Innovation. And I mean, as someone who puts great value in the original forms of these buildings and the original intention of these buildings, I have to be extremely complimentary to Waterloo Maple and to CIGI, that the modifications they've made of these spaces have been subtle. They haven't ruined them. They haven't changed the original idea. And frankly, that's at some sacrifice, because clearly the plan and the volumes that Barton Myers created for the Seagram Museum are not really that good for anything else. It's not the most efficient use of that volume. So all the more kudos to CIGI and Waterloo Maple for keeping it the way it is, because it is a Governor General's award-winning building. And I will say two other things that are significant about the Seagram Museum. And this will also come up in the exhibit at the Glay Glass Gallery, and also the one down in Cambridge called Ex Industria, which looks at the history of industrial architecture in Waterloo region. This is not only the first Governor General's award-winning building in Waterloo region, there had never been one before, but it is also the first deliberate conversion of an existing industrial building to a new use, which establishes a whole pattern of this, which includes, among other things, the conversion of Riverside Silk Mills into a school of architecture in Cambridge, the conversion of the other barrel warehouses, older barrel warehouses in behind us here, into condominiums, the Seagram lofts. There's and of course, most currently, you've got the conversion of the Bright Up block into the new headquarters for the Google's development arm in Canada. It's an extraordinary fact that these wonderful 19th and early 20th century industrial buildings are so appealing to modern use, either as residential, commercial, and institutional buildings. And that starts here. That starts with the Seagram Museum. I mean, it had been happening to a degree in other places, but not so much in Canada. This was a kind of turning point. And it's another theme that you'll see in Building Waterloo Region, that ideas start here. I mean, the University of Waterloo used this slogan, but there are all kinds of things that actually start here, that then go out and make their impact felt elsewhere. This, of course, the original condition of the Seagram Museum. Those pavilions on the ground floor, at least, were all dedicated to different aspects of the production of booze. What a great museum. And of course, it spawned, some other very positive projects, like the conversion of the warehouses into the Seagram lofts. And this wasn't an easy conversion either, because as you can see, the scale of the windows and location of the windows is not exactly residential. It took some imagination. Well, the magic, and so this is where the magic at the corner starts. I don't think there's anything magical about the corner prior to the Seagram Museum coming to it. I mean, except for the possibility that there's a railway track crosses it on a diagonal, and a stream that comes pretty close also to crossing it on a diagonal. Otherwise, what? Not much. And a big factory, big industrial emplacement making whiskey. Good. So, we get into the 90s, And a group of Waterloo people have this vision of a national gallery of ceramic and glass art. I mean, Winifred Shantz is the main spirit behind it, but there are others, and they raise money. What a crazy idea. I mean, to have a museum of booze on the site where they're making booze, there's some logic. This is just people really interested and dedicated to the notion. I mean, we had and have a strong culture of ceramic art and in the region, but it was a really ambitious notion for a national gallery dedicated to ceramic art. There was a competition held, an architectural competition, which was run by my predecessor as director of the University of Waterloo School of Architecture, a very, very talented architect, educator named Larry Richards. He was the professional advisor. He wrote the terms of the competition. There were lots of entries. And you will see, when you come to the exhibit at the Glay Glass Gallery, when it opens in a couple of weeks, you'll see some of the other alternatives. One of the things that I'm always intrigued by is not only who wins, but who loses. And lots of people lost. It's not as clear with the Glay and Glass Gallery what happens, because a lot of the people who entered were really well-established architects. Again, I'll talk about this at the Kitchener City Hall, but it's the losers at Kitchener City Hall who end up also winning big time. And if you come, I'll tell you why that's true. John and Patricia Patkow are extremely talented architects. They were very young at the time. They'd recently established their practice in Vancouver. They're graduates of the University of Manitoba. We can forgive them for that. And they are an architectural couple and partners in practice. Two clearly of the most talented architects in the country. They have won a dozen Governor General's medals. And they have done some of the most inspired buildings. They actually, the subtext, the dirty little truth about the Patkows is they were designing schools for First Nations in British Columbia. And they designed some of the most inspired schools. Seabird Island School, look at it on the internet. Just Google Seabird Island School and see this school that the roofs look like the spreading wings of an eagle. It's phenomenal. Came in on budget, came in on time, but you know what the BC Department of Education said? You are not allowed to hire the Patkows because the buildings look too good. People think they're expensive because they look expensive, not because they are, and we don't want that. We want mundane. Literally, we want mundane buildings because otherwise people think we're wasting tax dollars. It's so annoying and disgusting that the way these kinds of things are done. Anyway, the Patkows came up with a simple concept for the Glay and Glass Museum, which is essentially a series of parallel walls and spaces between them, and their masonry, which, the masters of this device in architecture were the ancient Romans. Masonry walls, parallel walls with strategically placed openings, and then architectural forms and figures placed either between the walls or actually intersecting or interrupting the walls. I mean, this is the way Romans designed buildings from the 1st century of the Common Era up until the 5th century of the Common Era. And Patkow's building is like that. You've got this vestibule space, which of course today houses the gift shop. You've got the interstitial space that had the stairs and the services, and then you move into the western space, which has the roof that drops to the center of the space rather than rising over it. And then you have the tower at the near end, this trapezoidal tower the cylindrical drum, which inserts and interrupts the walls, and then you have the rotated square, which actually perforates the west wall and creates a kind of ambiguity between the inside and the outside of the building. As an architectural idea, it's really very clear. It's essentially about the geometries, the relationship between geometry and structure, and then the relationship between a linear form and a puntal form, a kind of Platonic figure, circle, square. The tower at the north end is not a triangle, but it implies a triangle. The building my take on the building is that the city of Waterloo got a great deal. Ball Construction was building the building. There wasn't enough money to finish it. The construction had to stop. And then the city of Waterloo invested about $1.6 million, as I remember. So for a $1.6 million investment, they got a $7 million building. Pretty good deal, actually. And the city of Waterloo continues to own the building, and it is operated by the Canadian Glay Glass Gallery with its own independent board. It's an extremely successful institution in terms of its artistic level and consistently high artistic levels. I think, frankly, the thing that mystifies me about the whole damn process is how it ended up there, like how it ended up exactly where it is, back from the street, in ambiguous relationship to both Erb and Caroline. Always buildings on diagonals at the corner are dubious. It's a dubious strategy. I mean, except in the barrel warehouse where they had to. They had to cut it because that's where the lot ended. But what the Pat Cows did, of course, was project this terrace out, this great canopy that was supposed to actually be a canopy. There was supposed to be glass in the openings between the building and the blade. And then there were these 6 great towers that are supposed to be kilns and are supposed to reflect the kind of, the fire that is essential to clay and glass. The original idea was also that it would be quite visible from the street, but the city of Waterloo decided, for reasons that completely escape me, which provoked me to actually go to council and say what they wanted to do was completely contrary to the spirit of the building, which is actually plant things in front so you wouldn't be able to see the building as clearly as the Pat Cows intended you to. And then they put in that now I remember this day. When they explained to me that circular steel frame below the building towards the walkway, I said, what the heck is that? Oh, it's a Conestoga wagon wheel. Did anyone know that? Does no one understand that buildings aren't words? You can't just make something because you say that's what it is. It's got to actually look and feel like something. Architecture and landscape architecture are visual languages. You interpret them as they are, not translated through words. So I just said, this is all crazy. And they didn't listen to me, but that's okay. The only people some people listen. And you're very generous to be doing that right now. So the terrace is actually quite wide. We all know that the general knock on the building is that you couldn't tell where the door was. I mean, how many people did you talk to for the first 10 years this building was open? I couldn't find the door. Well, the door's in the front, really, it faces the street. Not all of the panes of glass open. So I have to compliment the present management and their architectural consultants from Walter Fady for actually cleverly putting in a handicapped device out in front that says entrance so that no one can say they don't know where the door is. It would be in this picture if this picture hadn't been taken the day the building opened. I'm a huge admirer of this building, and I've actually given tours of the building to visiting architects and architecture students. I like it also because, as the introduction said, I have a deep, I started the University of Waterloo architecture program in Rome, and I love Roman architecture. I adore Roman architecture, and so I see buildings like this, and if you've ever seen it, the Hilborn House, the Arthur Erickson House down on Blue Heron Crescent in Preston. These are buildings that have parallel masonry walls and then inflect the masonry, introduce other forms. I mean, this is the way the Romans made buildings, so they knew something. And the interior it's austere. I mean, it is austere, and it's designed and conceived to display three-dimensional objects, not two-dimensional objects, not things to hang on walls. I'm not going to minimize the challenges that the people who have to curate exhibits in this place face. The lighting is a problem, the acoustics are problems, there are all sorts of problems. So when I see photographs taken in there of the kinds of installations that have been done over the years, and in this case I have to compliment all the curators, but especially Christian Singer, who's just leaving. I mean, they've done a fabulous job in taking the space and taking inspiration from the space, and sometimes having to just figure it out. How do you do something in there? Well, so that's number two. And I do think it's a kind of magical building. And I guess in my heart of hearts, if we can bring in thousands of people to come and see the Building Waterloo Region show and see how buildings tell stories and how important these kinds of things are to our region, I just think getting way more people inside that building and getting people to appreciate it is going to be a really good thing. Go ahead a little over a decade, or no, just about a decade, and Mike Lazaridis decides he wants to found an Institute of Theoretical Physics in Waterloo, separate from the university, and I don't want to get into any large-scale speculations on why exactly Mike didn't want it to be part of the university, but he didn't. There are all kinds of connections that developed later, but in the first instance, he wanted an independent think tank. He went to the city and asked for a site in Waterloo Park, and at least in those days, was anyone about to say no to Mike Lazaridis? No. There was also a building on that site, as you know. There was the Waterloo Memorial Arena on the site previously, and the original shed for the arena had been removed for structural reasons and replaced by an inflatable structure which was hideous in every possible way, including playing hockey in it. They did keep the front structure, and there were some memorial plaques that had to be moved and deserved respect, and whether they got the full respect they deserved or not is up to debate. But Mike got his way, and he got his building. Now, in this case, the first two cases, I really wasn't involved personally, but in this case I was. Because Howard Burton, the executive director of the Perimeter Institute, called me and asked me if I would be the architectural advisor to select architects for this project. And to be ecumenical, he also called Larry Richards, who was by this time the dean at the University of Toronto and the director of the school at Ryerson, which wasn't actually a school of architecture at the time, it was architectural technology. We met once, and Larry and Michael just decided they weren't that interested in Waterloo, so I ended up being the guy, and I was interested in Waterloo. So I helped formulate a process in which we were planning. We called for expressions of interest from architects, and I can't remember how many we got, but we got quite a few, over 100. And then we selected out of that 6 who we were going to interview. And then the plan was to have 3 of them do a design competition to decide ultimately who was going to get the job. Well, so we did that. We got all of these submissions from architects telling us how great they were. And we culled it down to 6 that we thought were the greatest of the great. And they came in one by one. The last we saw were Saucier and Perrot. Gilles Saucier and André Perrot from Montreal. Now, they had actually first gained some fame by being finalists in the Kitchener City Hall competition. And so we're a couple of years on. They've never done a project in Ontario. They hired a young Waterloo graduate to advise them on how to get the project, and she came in and gave a brilliant presentation, and then Gilles, who is a poet, Gilles is so seductive, he's like, look at him, you know. He's fantastic. Well, he won Mike's heart completely. So at the end of the day, we're sitting there and trying to decide who we're going to invite to do the competition. And Lazaridis goes, well, we're going to invite Saucier and Perrot. And I said, okay. And who else? No one else. I said, what? We said we're going to have a competition. He said, I don't want a competition. I don't want to do anything else. You know, we're hiring those guys. So I thought, great, you know. It made my life easy. I didn't have to, no one's going to waste their time going into that competition, getting a little bit of money and doing a whole lot of work and not getting the job. So Saucier and Perrot it is. I'd never worked with them before. I didn't really know them very well. They were obviously incredibly talented and had a completely independent and unique view of the world. So fine, great. So I went to a couple of meetings after that, but basically in the end, as the project went on, I didn't have much involvement with it. Until one day Howard called me up and I went to, you may remember the Perimeter Institute had one period where it actually was located in the old post office in Waterloo, the Time Out Cafe building down there. And so I went in one day to see Howard. And I said, how's it going? And he said, well, I don't know how it's going. I'm not sure how it's going. Maybe you can help me figure out how it's going. So I said, sure, Howard, you know, what's going on? And he said, well, we've got this cost estimate and it's way over budget. Is there anything we can do? So I said, well, show it to me. And he showed it to me. And show me the drawings. You know, where does it stand now? And so I just looked at the site plan, and there's this several 100-meter long reflecting pool, and then a folded concrete slab with grass on top over a parking lot on the south side of the building. And I said, Howard, it says here the budget for site work is $800,000. He said, yeah, I said, who did this estimate? Oh, the architects. Oh, the architects did the estimate. I see. Howard, call a quantity surveyor. Call a cost estimator. I'm not a cost estimator. This site work is over $3 million. If it's a penny, it's over, not 800,000. This is insane. And we go through the whole, and I say, Howard, where are the mechanical rooms? they want to go into working group. Where are the mechanical rooms? Oh, I don't know. Well, who are your mechanical consultants? Well, the architects say we don't need them. All I can say is architecture in Quebec is done different. It's the only thing I can say to explain this. Because I said, okay, Howard, here's a list of quantity of cost estimators. Here's a list of reputable mechanical engineers. Here's a list of reputable structural engineers. You get in touch with these people and you get them involved in this project, because this project is headed for disaster, utter and complete disaster. So, oh, and I said get a project manager too. So, of course, there was conveniently the guy from the city of Kitchener who had project managed Kitchener City Hall. It heroically brought Kitchener City Hall in at below budget, a man named Laurier Prue, and so I got Laurier a job moonlighting as the project manager for the Perimeter Institute. And you know, as you know, in the end, it was well over budget, but it did open on time. And it actually had mechanical systems, which are kind of necessary in this part of the world. Anyway, I had to put this picture up. That is not the Governor General's medal that Gilles and André won for the Perimeter Institute. This is a more recent one, but I couldn't resist using our own cuddly David Johnson and André Perrault. This is Gilles and André on the other side. Well, the building, of course, is mysterious, as theoretical physics is mysterious. It has two sides that are completely unlike each other. The south-facing side faces the city, is this kind of mysterious black wall with these windows cut out of it, set back at the back of a thick wall, with some of them projecting out past the wall, most of them going in like loopholes in a medieval fortress, and then different colors on the slopes that connect the outer face of the wall to the glass. It's a bit of a cipher. It doesn't really reveal anything about the building. It doesn't give you any clue as to what the spatial organization of the building behind it is. And that's what they wanted. They wanted this kind of mystery of theoretical physics to be what you saw from the main public side of the building. And then, of course, they created this very intriguing site where they actually lifted the ground up over the bike racks and the parking lot. The issue, once again, and it seems incredible, but it's true, nobody could tell where the door was. Like, what's wrong with this site? Well, what's wrong with the site is perfectly self-evident, is that I just go right back to the beginning. Caroline Street didn't go through. They bashed it through to make it a one-way connector for Bridgeport Road down. There's no urban site, there's no urban pattern, there's no order to this street. It's just a mechanism to move cars. That's all it is. So of course there's no way of building buildings close to it or with it, and that's what happens. So the other side facing the lake, Silver Lake, is fabulous. I mean, you stand in the park and look at these projecting and receding offices that are the offices of the scholars here, especially in the evening over the lake. It's gorgeous. It's so engaging as an idea for a building. It's as engaging and intriguingly human because you actually see humans in these windows. I mean, it's a kind of completely schizoid building, right? The one side is totally mute. You have no idea what's behind that wall. You never see a person in any of those windows. It's completely mute. The other side is a kind of frame, and it's a whole series of kind of TV screens that have people moving behind them. It's great. It's a great classic architectural idea, kind of black-white, front, back, street, garden. There are all these things. And then the reflecting pool, the infamous reflecting pool, the $800,000 reflecting pool that cost $2.5 million. And of course, they couldn't keep it clean. The courtyard, the maintenance costs for that pool, if you talk to the people there, are staggering. We have leaves. Leaves fall in water. Leaves rot in water. Leaves stink in water. And in the middle, it's a narrow building, which is very interesting. But it's got this long atrium in the center with this wonderful set of skylights over it. And the walls of the building is not thick to start with, and with this void in the center, it's really just one room thick on either side. And then these fantastic cascading stairs. It's just a treat to be in it. Well, this is the one I stepped slightly outside the Governor General's winners because, of course, there is a building attached to Socian Perot's building. Now, this is one of the stories I can't really tell everything I know about, but I can say, because it's a matter of public record, that they called me up again and said, would I help them choose architects to put the addition on the building? And so I said, sure, I love the building, but why don't you just go and get Socian Perot? Well, we want to consider other people. So I said, okay. So we did, I started to do a classic selection process, send out a request for expressions of interest. We would get those, and I had done another one of those 3 weeks before for the building we're sitting in, and I'll come back to that. But so I'd just done one of these for Jim Balsley. So here I am with Mike Lazaridis again. Okay, we'll send out the call. So I draft the call. I just a modification of the one I did for this building, which was probably my mistake because Mike probably read it and said, "Whoa, that sounds too much like Jim." So I don't like that. I don't know. They weren't getting along that well at the time. So I said, fine, but I think this is the best way to go. He said, okay. So I booked the ad in the Globe and Mail. The day before it was going to run, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the day before it's going to run, I was in a conference waiting to speak. My cell phone rings. It's Mike. Mike says, pull the ad. What do you mean pull the ad? I don't want to do that. I said, well, what do you say to Mike Lazaridis? Okay. Okay. So I call the Globe and Mail, say, pull the ad. Well, you have to pay for it. I'm not paying for it. It's fine. So Mike calls back and says, okay, you pick 3 and I'll pick 3. What do you mean? We're going to interview 6. You pick 3 and I'll pick 3. Okay. I got my 3. He got his 3. We actually did what we were supposed to do in the first case. We interviewed those 6 and picked 3. And the 3 did a competition. So, of the 6, we picked 3. 2 of them were from my 3, and 1 was from his 3. So the finals were between Stephen Teeple, Jack Diamond and Schmidt, and Baird Sampson. So Diamond and Schmidt have done a lot of buildings in Waterloo region, especially recently in Cambridge, the new Cambridge City Hall, the new Dunfield Theatre. They've done buildings on the Waterloo campus. Stephen Teeple's done a lot of buildings around here. Burt Matthews Hall addition, the Environmental Science and Technology building on campus, the Preston Library, Preston Library has done a lot of buildings, good buildings. And Baird Sampson, of course, just did the church right across the street here. So we said, okay, do a design. And then I said to Mike, why didn't we ask Socian Perot? I didn't, and what? Is that the reason we canceled the ad? Yes, I didn't even want to see them. And I couldn't figure out. I thought he loved the Perimeter Institute, and he does. It's something that happened after that caused the problem. And it was a problem that was irreconcilable, and Gilles and Andre were not going to get the job. That was simple. No. Anyway, Diamond and Schmidt, Baird Sampson, and Teeple present alternatives. If you know the building, the west end of it is an opening. There's a kind of open court, and the ends of those wings are very fragmented. They don't look finished. They're not resolved. It's not a simple architectural form. And so 2 out of the 3 firms decided that the answer to expanding, doubling the size of the Perimeter Institute, was extending it to the west and continuing that line of first the atrium and then the open courtyard, go west. Only Teeple had the guts to say, well, because they also didn't want to disturb a Governor General's award-winning building. Like they wanted to show respect, which I think is a legitimate impulse. But people said no. There are two huge problems with going west. Number one, you waste the existing atrium. You have no connection to the existing atrium. It turns out with the fire laws, you actually had to go through a narrow little corridor and go through a single door to get into the other half of the building, and it had no direct connection to that beautiful atrium. Teeple figures it out that if you wrap the east end of the building, you can wrap around, have an entry process that takes you right into the atrium. Perfect. It also faces the street, which is a huge advantage for a building. To have a door that people can see from the street, right? This is sort of rule number one in architecture. Public space is predominant. You gotta have a door that faces the principal public space unless you don't want people to know how to get into your building. So Teeple did this thing, and then, frankly, I think he didn't get the Governor General's medal because they didn't visit the building, and they probably didn't like the east elevation, the kind of spaceship elevation that faces Caroline Street. But if you actually go in that building and see what he did to get you around the theater and into the atrium and the fantastic spaces he created, this kind of indeterminate space he created with these courtyards, interior courtyards that literally spiral up through the building, it's a fabulous building. It's a fabulous building. And I can only say, it won an OAA award. It didn't win a Governor General's medal. That's too bad. I'm sure Gilles and Andrea are happy. Mike isn't. He told me recently that he really wanted another Governor General's medal for that building. And it looks like, Mike's going to become very intimate with architecture again because his son is coming into the School of Architecture at Waterloo. So there you go. Maybe I'll get some more jobs advising him on architecture, or maybe his son will. This is the elevation that is, Stephen will explain it very poetically. I'm not a great fan of it myself. I didn't mind Gilles' mute Darth Vader elevation. This one I'm not so fond of. But again, he does a clever thing with the lake side of it, and this again from across the lake is completely different from Gilles Saussier's elevation, but it does essentially the same thing, which creates a kind of theater inside the building, and again, at nighttime when the lights are on, you can actually, the activity of the building is completely visible from the other side of the lake. It's fantastic. Well, which brings us to where we're sitting right now. And most of you have heard the video or saw the video that was up here before I came to the stage. This building was designed by a firm called Kubara Payne McKenna Bloomberg, and just so it's clear that the circle is closing in more ways than one. It's not only that it's attached to the Seagram Museum, which is the first Governor General's award-winning building in Waterloo region, but Kubara Payne McKenna Bloomberg is the successor firm of Barton Myers. Barton left Canada. He wasn't American. He's from Virginia. He left Canada after he practiced on his own for a while. He first split up with Jack Diamond. He practiced with Barton Myers Associates, and that's when Kubara, Payne, McKenna, and Bloomberg joined him. And then Barton pulled the ripcord and went and has practiced for the last basically 20 years in California and done some really important buildings. He's been a professor at the School of Architecture at the University of California at Los Angeles. He's a very, very distinguished person and just a great and wonderful guy who I always will admire. I had the privilege of being interviewed by the one of the big newspapers in Virginia who was doing a retrospective on him. And I was really proud to be able to talk about Barton as a teacher. Well, and Barton as a teacher is what these guys will talk about, what Shirley Bloomberg and Bruce Kobara, Marianne McKenna, and Tom Payne will talk about, because they basically left architecture school and started working for Barton, and he was their mentor. He was the one that got them going. Now, these guys are the architectural firm. I mean, Financial Post is doing articles on them. They're world-renowned. They are Canada's architectural firm, to be frank. You know, they've done the Faculty of Music at the University of Toronto. They did that fantastic thing on Jarvis Street in Toronto, the National Ballet School. They're designing buildings all over the world. These people are, they are our firm to all intents and purposes at the moment. And they are extremely capable, very gifted presenters, at least these two. The way the firm has traditionally divided up its jobs is typically Bruce and Shirley will do jobs, and Marianne and Tom would do jobs. Tom is now retired, so they're reorganizing a bit. But let me just say, I'll be talking more about them when I talk at Kitchener City Hall in a few hours. And again, if you come across to see the No Small Plans show, you'll see some very interesting things with respect to these guys. Well, I have a little, I can't go too far. My colleague Ken McLaughlin is in the audience, and he and I were both on the committee that oversaw the selection of the architects, and we were actually involved in the building project pretty much, not quite to completion, but almost, and then we were the ones who formed the jury that picked the lunatic Boston sculptor who did the project for the courtyard. But we had a very interesting time because, as I said, just before I helped Mike Lazaridis find the architects for the addition of Perimeter Institute, we were working with Jim Balsillie to pick the architects for this project, and we did it in a conventional way. Send out an RFP, then selected a group of architects, got more detailed input from them, and then selected a group to be interviewed. The interviews were largely confidential, but I have two little stories that I want to tell. And Ken, interrupt me if I misspeak, okay? If I say anything that I shouldn't. But after the first firm presented, which was Baird Sampson, which had also been one of my picks for the Perimeter Institute, Jim instructed the administrator to close the door of the boardroom that we were meeting in, whereupon he said to me, or to all of us, that after listening to this presentation, it became clear to him that architecture was about excess and that award-winning buildings house failed institutions. So everyone at the table kind of looks at me because I'm the only architect there. And I was sitting right beside him. He was at the head of the table, I was on his left side. And so I decided to go for the low-hanging fruit first, which is I said, well, you know, this building won a Governor General's medal and it's housing CIGI, and no one would call that a failed institution. I was hoping against hope that he wouldn't remind me that the Seagram Museum had failed, but he didn't. And then I gave my little homily on the fact that architects are not about excess. What they are about is trying to get the best value and the most from the money that the client has to spend to make the best building possible. And that sometimes leads to some difficulties. And you know, he actually took it all pretty well, and it was a wonderful kind of moment of challenge for me because no one had ever put me in that kind of spot before. And you know, Jim liked putting people, and I'm sure still likes putting people in those kinds of spots. And it was a great moment. And he kind of seemed to accept it. He didn't fight about it anymore, and then the next firm came in, and they were very businesslike, and that was good. I will say that when Teeple Architects came in, Steve had a little sketch for the project that made the Balsley School look like a trellis with a lot of greenery on it. And as you can tell from the building we're in, Jim actually has quite a traditional view of what an academic building should be. We have a cloister, we have a bell tower, we have what amounts to a chapel. This is a kind of very traditional, almost medieval idea of what the educational institution is. And for someone to walk in with this 7-story high wall of plants, you know? So Jim had a habit. It's a great habit. You know, if he's not interested, he just picks up his BlackBerry and starts doing his emails. And so I thought Steve would have been very disappointed, and I'm sure he was. But then, of course, 3 weeks later, he wins the competition. He wins the competition for the Perimeter Institute. And when we talked afterwards, Steve said, well, you know, I should have changed my whole presentation for Balsley. And I said, no, Steve. Do what you do. You know, 50% isn't bad. The presentation that you gave to Balsley was never going to win Balsley. That just wasn't a Jim Balsley project. But the presentation you gave to Lazaridis was a Lazaridis project, and you got that one. So be true to yourself, be honest, don't try to turn yourself into an architect that you're not just to get a project, because you know what the outcome of that is going to be. It's going to be awful. You're going to be fighting with the client the whole time, and it'll just be a disaster. Be yourself. 50% isn't bad. Well, okay, so later on, KPMB shows up. And Shirley Bloomberg and Bruce Kubara come in. And Shirley starts the presentation by talking about how she began her architectural career, first day out of school, by working for Barton Myers and climbing through the barrel racks to measure them in what was going to be the Seagram Museum. Perfect. Perfect thing to do. They're a great firm. They do great buildings. They connected immediately, and that was that. Except, and this is a kind of universal to think about, that Jim particularly went after her with these very aggressive questions and testing her and poking to see how she'd answer. So it's over. We meet. We decide to select KPMB, and not 15 minutes out of the meeting, my cell phone rings, and it's Shirley from the car driving back to Toronto. She's apologizing. I'm sorry we did so badly. I'm sorry he didn't like us. I'm sorry. We should have done better. And I'm sitting there. You don't know that in an interview when people actually push you, that's not a bad thing? I couldn't say that. I couldn't say anything. I just said, you were okay. It's fine. We'll see what happens. I couldn't let on that I already knew that they'd got the job. But it is interesting how these dynamics go in an interview. And I find it the same when I'm interviewing students for admission to the School of Architecture. The smartest ones are the ones you push hardest to find out how far they can go. Absolutely. Anyway, this is the original concept. It's very interesting. The Clay and Glass Gallery, the Perimeter Institute, of course, without the addition, and then this block with the Seagram Museum in the upper right, and then just kind of thinking about gridding out the block. One thing that's amazing about KPMB is, unless they're faking these sketches after the fact, they're amazingly good at getting the project down in the first 2 days. The first sketches, I mean, look at that. They claim that's the first sketch they did for the front of the building. It's the front of the building. Even this manic roof. And then, the final presentation drawings, there are some changes in the detail of the company, like the bell tower, some changes in the elevation, but the concept of the big roof, we did manage to convince them not to connect into the old building, because any connection to the older building would have disrupted the operation of the building, because you wouldn't be going into the atrium as Barton had suggested. You would have been going in further back in the building, and that would have screwed up everything. So we just made bigger roofs so that you only have to go outdoors for just a tiny, tiny little bit between the one building and the other. But you still have to go outdoors. You cannot connect between this building and the other one indoors. The roof was, of course, the big gesture and the idea of a kind of expression of ecumenism and everyone under the same roof, and then a big glass wall that gave onto a very solid wall, which is the wall, of course, right behind me. This building also has some pretty bizarre technical things. I mean, if you listen to the video before, they're not bizarre. They're environmentally responsible. They've a huge reduction in the cost of heating and cooling this building through using natural ventilation and different techniques. But the structural innovation was the wildest. They look like giant inflated golf balls. That's the floor. And so the floor of this building is made by putting reinforcing in around these big plastic balls. And then you pour the concrete. So the floor is mainly empty. And of course, it actually, you can, because the balls touch on tangent, you can actually move air all through the floors and heat the building from the floor. It's a very, very clever. It hadn't only been used once in Canada before, which made some people around here nervous, and I don't know how it works, but we did it, and it looks great. A floor made of giant black golf balls. And so here we are. Maris Mazzulis' photograph that tries to capture the relationship between the academic block, the campanile, the bell tower, the big vestibule with the huge projecting roof, and the relationship. Even, I just think they did an amazing job of modulating all of the proportions. It isn't it's not a hugely flashy, aggressive building. I mean, the roof is a big statement, but just the way they managed to make it fit between the existing building and the solid block of the academic wing, it really is a stupendous piece of design. And it's a bit quieter than Steve's building across the way, and frankly, it reflects the two clients. I mean, Jim Balsley got what he wanted, a kind of a sanctuary, and Mike got what he wanted, a kind of agitated space of theoretical physics in which anything might happen and nothing lines up. It's terrific. Well, the courtyard, don't leave here without going in the courtyard. The courtyard's fantastic. It is a map of the world. You do get to visit whatever it is, 24 most significant points in the history of human rights and governance. The reflecting pool is fantastic. I mean, these people are really good at what they do, and they can do it. It looks quiet. It doesn't look, again, really aggressive or flashy. It's expensive. I mean, make no bones about that. It's expensive. KPMG does not do cheap buildings. Interesting, by contrast, Steve Teeple does. Steve Teeple won a Governor General's Award in the last go-round for doing a little church out in Scarborough that cost about $144 a foot. It's pretty. This building did not cost $144 a foot, I assure you. But after we're finished here, I do suggest going out there, and I just have one little epilogue because it is problematic. When we were trying for the website for Building Waterloo Region, which is buildingwaterlooregion.ca, all one word, please visit it, we did a panorama of Galt, Cambridge, which of course Grand River. We did Kitchener, which is Kitchener City Hall, around to King Street, going both ways. When we tried to do one here you've got these 4 Governor General's Award-winning buildings, and you can actually take a picture that has all of them in it, more or less. But the problem is that there's very little relationship between them. This complex is absolutely attached to urban fabric. It's at a right angle intersection. It's a building of right angles. It holds the street. It enhances the street with these little bosques and forests along the street. It's very elegant, and it has a big sort of setback from the street at the main entrance. Very sane urbanism. And then one really nice effect is that you, instead of having the courtyard being completely cut off from the outside, there's actually the diagonal view here, so that anyone walking through the street, you may not be able to get in the courtyard, but you can see that there's a courtyard in the center of this building. The Perimeter Institute and the Glay Glass Gallery have the problem that there's nothing for them really to relate to, even each other. And so my feeling is, as we look down Erb Street and as we see a huge amount of development, I mean, who cannot just be knocked flat by the amount of construction that's going on in Waterloo right now? Mostly not very good apartments and condos. Some good, but lots that are not. And what is King Street between University and Columbia actually supposed to be? Is it really supposed to be a kind of canyon with about 8 doors on it for high-rise buildings? Is that what we really wanted there? And that's the problem right now, is we've got some of the best designed buildings in the world within a stone's throw of where we're sitting. But what are they ultimately going to add up to, and what reverberations go outward from them? And I mean, this is just my question as I look down Erb Street, and, like, is this, we can build lots, but are we building well? So here it is. This is the panorama that I was talking about. And you can't get Saucier & Perrot's building in because people actually made a building that faced the street, which is actually a good idea. The Glay Glass Gallery is a great building, but it's made even more ambiguous in relation to the street by these forests and things that are growing up in front of it, and that's just not right. So we'll see what we can do about that. And you can see, I mean, these are our banners: Kitchener City Hall, Waterloo, Cambridge. This was my attempt to paint some kind of a picture of what architecture here is, what is magical and inspiring about the architecture at Erb and Caroline. Point out that there are some challenges and issues around the buildings and the spaces around them and between them. But to think we really have accomplished something extraordinary at this place, and we are going to celebrate that in an even more extensive way throughout the summer. This is going to be the summer of architecture in Waterloo region. I don't know why exactly it happened. Other people have joked that it's because when I stepped down as director, I didn't know what else to do except take on some ludicrous, impossible dream. Me, the man of La Mancha, Don Quixote out there tilting at windmills. It's crazy. It's totally crazy. 8 exhibitions. There's never been a festival of architecture in Canada that's as big as this one. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk to you about these things, to ask you to participate. We have programs that include 8 exhibitions, 3 programs of walking tours. We have visiting lecturers. The most outstanding female architect in the world, selected last year, is coming here to speak on the 30th of July. She'll be speaking actually at the Perimeter Institute. Her name is Alison Brooks. She's just she practices in London, England. She's just won another RIBA award for a project she did. She was the Outstanding Architect in England in 2012, Outstanding Housing Architect in England for 3 years running, and the Outstanding Female Architect in the world in 2013. She's from London, Ontario. She went to school at the University of Waterloo. So come and see her on the 30th. You can book, beginning next week, you'll be able to book the tickets at Perimeter. We have programs for children. There's Kids Build Waterloo Region at the Glay Glass Gallery. Bring your kids. Royal Co is helping us build things, build cities, build buildings, build houses, build domes. Bring your children, your grandchildren, and urchins you find anywhere. So I want to thank you for your attention. I want to encourage you to participate in Building Waterloo Region. If you're going to the food trucks down on Duke Street tonight, to the night market down on Duke Street or any of down in Kitchener, and you happen to be hanging around City Hall Square around 11, and you haven't heard enough, come back for more. Thank you and I will take questions.